Okay, I can't see that one.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right, hello, everybody. I'd like to thank all of you who are watching and listening live, and also all of you who are watching and listening in the future. I would like to dedicate this lecture recital to my late father, Eugene Cornolo, uh, who passed away earlier this year. Thank you. Idioms of composition and technique in the guitar works of two modern Cuban composers. The country of Cuba's eventful history, cultural diversity, and high esteem for the arts has resulted in arguably some of the richest creative work on the planet. Complications due to various political and social circumstances have unfortunately led to much of this work being sorely underexposed to the rest of the world. This lecture will examine works for guitar by two 20th century Cuban composers, Sonata para Guitarra by José Ardebo, who lived from 1911 until 1981, and Cantos Yoruba de Cuba by Héctor Angulo, who lived from 1932 to 2018. Explored today will be the historical context of these works, their artistic significance, their pedagogical value, and their connections with the rest of the world, both past and present. This will include a description of the artistic climate in the early to mid 20th century in regard to the guitar, classical music worldwide, and specifically in Cuba. In addition, background on each composer's life and works will be presented. Of special note is the information about the folk music from which these pieces were created, music born through the circumstances of slavery and colonialism. Observations from my own experience in regard to learning and performing the pieces, including some of my own analyses and pedagogical discoveries, will be presented as well. This project yields the following assertions. 1. Both composers employ nationalistic as well as a variety of modern approaches to composition. 2. Strikingly artistic and uniquely guitaristic pieces were created in these contexts and are worthy of wider recognition. And 3. Much is to be gained by the guitarist who endeavors to play these pieces in the areas of technique, capacity to interpret modern compositions, and a more profound understanding of human culture. Setting the stage, music in the early to mid 20th century. At this time, it is safe to say that Western art music, and indeed all artistic disciplines, experienced a blossoming of experimentation and exploration, which included a variety of efforts to either distinctly break from or revisit the past. As the late Romantic composers continued to test the boundaries of expression and form while maintaining some connection to the foundations built in the Classical period, others sought to reinvent or redefine music entirely, and some, like the artists being studied in this thesis, adventurously brought together many elements from both past and present, both folk music, along with the academic and refined, to create works that are clearly modern, distinctly 20th century, and arguably could not have been written in any other time, and possessing and reflecting the exploration and recombining that was occurring in the art music world as a whole, especially in the West. In addition, the guitar's rebirth as a respected concert instrument, as well as a powerful vehicle for composition in the early 20th century, is an essential factor which, along with the other artistic forces described herein, set the stage for these engaging works to be birthed. Europe and the United States. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world of art music in Europe was inhabited by the late Romantic or post-Romantic composers, including Gustav Mahler, Richard Strauss, and Jean Sibelius. In addition, the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist movements were in full swing with Debussy and Ravel. Simultaneously, a movement in radical contrast to even many of the most modern explorations was emerging, that of atonality, such as the Second Viennese School. In Cuba, art music in Cuba existed since the early colonial times, primarily as church music as far as is known. By the end of the 19th century, though, the nation had produced a substantial amount of works in both the classical and romantic styles, including symphonies, opera, and piano music. Notably, in the last part of the century, the country was saw the beginning of musical nationalism with Ignacio Cervantes, who lived from 1847 to 1905, the most important Cuban composer of his generation. A successful concert pianist, his original works combined folk music, elements of Afro-Cuban and Guajira, or Hispanic rural traditions, in a romantic, virtuoso piano style. The trend of musical nationalism continued on the island as the 20th century began, but now, side by side with other important developments which were occurring worldwide: Impressionism, atonalism, neoclassicalism, and expressionism, among others. New approaches to every element of music were being tested, as well as efforts to reconnect with or reframe the past, as well as the incorporation of folk and popular music elements. For example, the music of the then emerging American art form called jazz. Important figures, including composers and educators Amadeo Rodin and Alejandro Garcia Carturra, who were producing nationalist music that also utilized 20th century approaches to harmony and orchestration, among other techniques. The young Jose Ardebo, the composer of the sonata that I just performed, soon after arriving in Havana in 1930, immediately involved himself in the city's art music scene and became friends and colleagues with Carturra and Rodin. In a morbid turn of events, Rodin and Carturra both met untimely deaths in 1939 and 1940, respectively. And this led to Ardebo taking over teaching duties for Rodin's composition class at Conservatorio Municipal de La Habana. This musical climate in Cuba was all accompanied by the rebirth of the guitar as a serious instrument of art music, in no small part due to the singular efforts of Andre Segovia, with many others following. Andre Segovia, the most dominant force in the world of classical guitar in the early to mid 20th century, was indisputably Andres Segovia. Above and beyond the already enormous goal of virtuosity, Segovia made it his life's mission to not only master the classical guitar, but to greatly enhance its repertoire and above all elevate its status to one of at least equal to that of other serious musical instruments. He soon began what would become a lifetime of touring the world. He transcribed many important works for the guitar, which were originally composed for other instruments, including many works from the Renaissance, Baroque, and Classical periods, one of the most significant being Bach's Chaconne, originally written for the violin. In addition, his repertoire included traditional classical guitar pieces from the master 19th century guitarists and composers Fernando Sor and Francisco Tárrega, among others. Quite notably, in regard to the rise in status of the guitar, Segovia had many works composed specifically for him by important composers of the time, including Joaquín Rodrigo y Héctor Villalobos. Some background on each composer. Jose Ardebo. Okay. Pardon me. Jose Ardebo. Jose Ardebo was a prominent Cuban composer, conductor, and educator who composed over 130 pieces, covering all genres of music except opera. He was born in Barcelona, Spain, and moved in 1911, and moved to Cuba in 1930. and became immediately active, as I described earlier. Sonata para Guitarra, his only work for solo guitar, was composed in 1948. This excerpt from Oxford Music Online describes his academic focus around that time. Quote, from 1936 onwards, he was professor of music history and aesthetics at the Conservatorio Municipal de La Habana. And 2 years later, he replaced Amadeo Rodin as professor of harmony and composition. Ardeville's composition class at the conservatory gave birth to the Grupo de Renovación Musical, which existed from 1942 through 1948. A tonality, although not 12-tone music, polytonality, polyrhythm, and superimposition of different harmonies, modalism, and above all, neoclassicalism constituted the basis of Ardeville's strict teaching regime. The above information, along with Ardeville's published correspondence with Aaron Copland, Henry Cowell, and others, and the solid amount of his other writings that exist, demonstrate that he sought to be a serious protagonist in the development of 20th century music. The composer and his contemporaries were exploring new compositional approaches, and he quite likely was intentional in their employment in the construction of this work. Hector Angulo. Hector Angulo is an important 20th century Cuban composer who created orchestral, chamber, vocal, and solo instrumental works beginning in the 1950s and continuing into the 21st century, including several solo guitar pieces and at least one guitar duet. He lived and worked in Cuba the majority of his life, and therefore access to many scores, recordings, or a comprehensive catalog of his work has so far been difficult to acquire. This could be because of the restrictive nature of the relationship between the US and Cuban government, which includes a trade embargo, and perhaps that the practice of internet archiving is not yet widespread in Cuba, as well as the fact that some scores and recordings are out of print. We are fortunate to have, however, the score and several recordings of one of his most popular works, Cantos Yoruba de Cuba, for solo guitar, as well as some pertinent information about his life and the folk music and culture upon which the piece is based. According to Oxford Music Online, quote, he was born in 1932 in Santa Clara, Cuba, which is about 175 miles from Havana. And at the age of 16, he went to the capital city to study with important musicians and composers, Zenaida Romeo, Serafin Pro, and Julian Orbon, Julian Orbon was once referred to by Aaron Copland as Cuba's most gifted composer of the new generation. He began composing in the 1940s, and his works began being performed in the 1950s, unquote. An interesting side note to his career is an occurrence that led to a certain amount of fame and later controversy. In 1959, during the early days following the Cuban Revolution, he was attending a summer course at Tanglewood in Western Massachusetts, USA, and later that year received a scholarship to the Manhattan School of Music. Soon, relations between the US and Cuba worsened, and Angulo feared that once he returned to Cuba, that it would not be easy to return to the US, and he wanted to complete his studies at the Manhattan School of Music before departing. In the meantime, he also had to earn some money, so he worked summers at the Woodland Summer Camp in upstate New York, where folk singer and activist Pete Seeger visited during the summer of 1962. It was during this visit that Angulo taught Seeger the song Guajira Guantanamera, a sort of anthem that was popularized in the 1930s Cuba by singer and radio host Joseito Fernandez. The song's origin and actual composer are to this date a matter of controversy, and in addition, it was the custom for new verses to be added or improvised by whomever was singing it,
often about current events or whatever the singer was currently inspired by. The version that Angulo taught Seeger in 1962 uses as lyrics the verses of a poem by Cuban poet Jose Marti. And thankfully, there exists an audio recording of that actual performance and a discussion of the lyrics' meaning between Seeger and Angulo. Pete Seeger would later record and help popularize the song outside of Cuba, and mistakenly credited Angulo as co-author. In a distinctly different musical vein, Angulo would soon return to his homeland and join Cuba's burgeoning avant-garde. In 1965, he composed Trio for Violin, Flute, and Piano. In 1967, composed Sonata for 11 instruments, both important pieces in establishing the Cuban avant-garde with their use of serial procedures and incorporation of aleatory techniques. Soon after, he was pursuing a more nationalistic route, especially in regard to the African roots of Cuban culture. Prominent in Cuba is the culture of the Yoruba people. Yoruba are a people, a language, and a religion of West Africa. Many of the slaves brought to Cuba originally were Yoruban, and their culture, especially their religion and ritual music, has survived to this day on the island. In 1967, he composed music for Ibeyi Anya, a children's play based on a Yoruba short story, and in 1969, Cantos Afro-Cubanos for voice and piano, both pieces incorporating Afro-Cuban material. In 1970, he completed Cantos Yoruba de Cuba for solo guitar, which consists of his arrangements of 7 melodies, which are actual songs of praise to various deities of West African Yoruban religion, a practice, as I said, brought to Cuba by slaves in the 18th and 19th centuries. So I want to just, in the remaining few minutes, demonstrate tell you a little more about this source material. So the first piece I played, Cantos Yoruba de Cuba, as I said, are arrangements of melodies used in the Yoruban religion. The traditional way of performing these melodies is they are sung. There is not, and they are played. They are accompanied by the bata drums, a special type of drums considered sacred, used for the Yoruban rituals. And traditionally, there's not a set harmony. It's just voice and percussion. So I'm going to play a very short clip of what the original settings. This is the melody that appeared as in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the Cantos Yoruba that I just played. And this is more or less the traditional setting. With voice and percussion. These are the bata drums. And let me show you. The very first piece that I played
So that's the melody. You can see Angulo did quite a bit with that melody. He used reharmonization, used a lot of methods of composition. In the interest of time, I just want to show one of the many guitar techniques. In the fourth movement, there's a section where he played the melody is to be played with artificial harmonics, special. That's a very nice technique available on guitar. This particular piece was challenging because not only does the player have to play the artificial harmonics, which involve quote unquote fretting and striking the finger with the right hand, an octave or 12 frets above where it's being fretted with the left hand. There's also a simultaneous accompaniment part. So it's not. But also. So that's just one more of the guitaristic things employed. There are many more, as the guitar, such as the guitar pizzicato, more outside the classical music world, known as palm muting. And of course, you heard many different types of harmony. Quartal harmony lends itself to the guitar, since the guitar is tuned in fourths, and also obviously great creative use of the guitar's open string capabilities. The other piece I played, Sonata para Guitarra by Jose Ardebo, I used quite a lot of adventurous 20th century harmony, but also really made use of the guitar. There's lots of 6-string chords, lots of complicated and what would be considered uncommon chords. And one of the things I experienced was the many ways these chords could be produced. They can be strummed with the thumbnail, strummed with the flesh of the thumb. Some strings strummed with the thumb and others plucked with the fingers. Strummed with the back of any of the fingernails. On and on. Also, as you can hear, these are kind of unusual chords. And so great care is taken to bring out each voice and to produce the composer's desired effect. In the second movement of that piece, there's something that relates to a different Cuban folk style called punto cubano or punto guajiro. And that's, I'm sure there's some Afro-Cuban influence because it certainly has a certain rhythmic feel, but it also has a very direct connection to folk music from Spain. And it's the second movement. It's in 6/8 time. And it implies perhaps a G major, C major, D major harmony. And I want to close by playing you a very short excerpt of the authentic punto cubano being performed. And often the musical accompaniment is very similar. And it's really a vehicle for the singers, and sometimes it's even a competition between singers to recite their verses.
Improvisación.
So I don't know if you caught that word, but the singers compete by improvising lyrics within a specific form.
Como ya no soy quien era, aquí no soy conocido. Como ya no soy.
So hopefully you can hear the connection and the influence of this style of music with especially the second movement of the sonata by Jose Ardebo. At this point, I would like to thank Dr. Tarosian, Dr. Kowalkowski, Dr. Chang, my thesis committee, and everyone here who's watching. Thank you for your attention and support. And I will now close my lecture.